This is the Leadership Podcast, and we study leaders. This is episode 466, featuring Dan Manning, founder and chief story architect at Build a Story. Thank you for joining us today. This is Jim Vasilopoulos, founder of Rafty Advisors, and this is the Leadership Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Jan Rutherford, founder of Self-Reliant Leadership. Thanks for making us a part of your day as we study leaders. And you can find all our past episodes at theleadershippodcast.com, a whole catalog of evergreen episodes. And this episode is brought to you by Darley. Darley Mission supports all our military and first responders with equipment they need to ensure mission success, whether that's a drone or emergency medical supplies. Learn more about this great company and the people supporting our nation's heroes at darley.com. Darley, you serve others, we serve you.
Yeah, today we have the very special distinction of having Dan Manning on the show. Before I tell you a little bit about him, I just want to tell you how I met him. Dan and I met up in Cincinnati at a DAV, Disabled American Veterans event where we were supporting Patriot Boot Camp. And I was there as a mentor, and Dan was as well, but he was giving a presentation. So I got there a little bit early. I got to see Dan's presentation, and I was, Jan, I'm telling you, blown away. This was one of the cleanest, best presentations I've ever seen. Like from a content standpoint, it was just like spectacular. The slides, were so on point and spectacular. And then when we got to the Q&A section, Dan handled it like a boss, and you can just tell when someone knows their content. And so I really loved it. So I'm going to introduce you to Dan real quick. I'm going to tell you, he's the chief story architect to Build a Story, helping founders craft short, impactful stories. He's a former fighter pilot and a U.S. diplomat, and he once led air ops against ISIS and negotiated with Russia. So he's kind of done a few things. Now he explores how stories shape behavior. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I'm really thrilled to be here. You've got a great podcast, and I'm glad to be a guest among the other great guests you've had.
Yeah, thank you. And I think this is just going to be such a wonderful discussion because I love the way you presented your material. It was just so clean and crisp and clear. And even now, having seen you post on LinkedIn, I'm like, wow, I wish all my posts were as good on LinkedIn. It's just fantastic work. Before we get into that, tell us a little bit about something about you that's like not in the public bio, something no one would be able to dig up on you.
So that's a challenge, right? I mean, I tell a lot of stories about myself and about things that things that I do. But I would probably say I don't talk so much about one of my hobbies, which is cooking. I'm a pretty good cook. I do all the cooking at home, but we've had the opportunity to live all around the world and visit lots of different places and eat lots of great food. So we have a pretty eclectic menu that I make here at home, and it's something that I enjoy doing that has very little to do with storytelling or business or anything outside of that. And it's something that I can just get into the kitchen and do, and then you have something to eat when you're done as well.
Cool. Of all the places you've been in the world, of all the cuisines you've had the opportunity to kind of like taste and sample, which one is your favorite?
I love Japanese cuisine. It's also very, very clean. It is very, very precise. It looks simple, but there's often a lot of work that has to go behind the scenes to make it look simple when it comes out. And it is fantastic. It lets each food sing with its own flavor, and it's it's a pleasure. I love it.
Cool. Hey, so you kind of crossed me as a Renaissance man. You've done a lot of different things. I mean, you're Air Force combat pilot. You've been a diplomat. You've been a speechwriter. You've done all kinds of things all over the world. How did that lead you to where you are today, teaching people how to tell stories that move people to action?
So I think part of being a good storyteller is having good stories to tell, right? Putting yourself in a variety of different places in a variety of different circumstances, and then seeing what you can learn and holding on to those lessons and being able to share those with other people. So I've always had this drive to go and do interesting things, right? Things that most people haven't done, to have experiences that most people haven't had, and then to put those together. But also a big part of my life has been spent teaching. One of my first assignments as a pilot was as an instructor pilot. I stayed there teaching the brand new pilots, how to fly the very first, some of the very first planes that they ever flew. I was an A-10 instructor pilot, teaching people how to fly the A-10 and then to be instructors in the A-10 and how to do, the most advanced missions that we do there. And whenever you teach, you have to find a different way to communicate because each person receives information in a slightly different way. And what might work for me to learn the lesson may not work for you. So I need to, as the instructor, challenge myself to find a different way to talk about something that I already understand. And when I could do that, it opens my mind to different ways of seeing things. And um, my experience has always been that if I'm teaching something, I get better at it myself as well. And probably the most reliable way to get better at something is to find a way to start teaching it because it'll force me to find those new ways and those new avenues and those new perspectives and then start sharing them.
Yeah. What I find fascinating about this is, it's one thing to say like there's a skill in how to tell a story. And, people know they've all got a good friend who can tell stories really, really well. But I'm kind of curious. It's not just like learning how to tell a story well, but like I think what you brought up there as you were talking about teaching is like how to know which story to tell. Is that just like instinct or something that like a couple different synapses, cross and now all of a sudden it's like I know what story I need to tell in the moment, or is there more method to that? I don't know. I'm curious.
No, there's definitely more method. Like the one of the disservices I think that a lot of people who are storytellers today, one of the disservices that we do for people is referring to movies and novels and plays as sort of the gold standard of storytelling. Because what works in a movie is very effective for the goal that that movie is designed for, right? A movie is designed to be entertaining, right? To sell tickets so that we come into the movie theater, the lights go down, we're able to, put our phones on silent and for 2 hours just immerse ourselves into whatever you're going to present me. There's also special effects and there's a score and there's other things that are going on, but it's easy to get immersed into that story. But it's not the best analog for how we need to tell stories in real life because our real life audience doesn't know that they're about to receive a story. Our real life audience doesn't have their popcorn ready and their phone on silent, right? They're busy. They're distracted. There's other things that are going on for them. So when we take these lessons of entertainment storytelling and start trying to apply them in a leadership context or in a business context, it often doesn't exactly line up. And this is one of those things that I'm not telling stories for the sake of entertainment. I'm not telling stories so that people will laugh and nod and say, "Man, that guy's a great storyteller." I am telling stories because I want people to do something. I want them to make a decision to, if I'm working with a startup founder, to invest in the startup. If I'm working with somebody who is trying to sell their product, I want someone to make the decision to buy. I want someone to make the decision to change their perspective on the way that they've seen something all of their life. I want people to take some action, and leading people to action through storytelling is different than entertainment storytelling. So when I think about what is the story that I need to tell, the question that I start with and what I teach inside my apprenticeship program is you first start with what is the transformation that you want to illustrate? What is the transformation? Maybe it's going from not knowing to knowing. Maybe it's going from fear to security. Maybe it's going from old ways to new ways and the benefit of those. And I think about what is that transformation that I need to communicate. And now I look for what is a story that communicates that transformation. Now, it doesn't have to fit 100%, right? It doesn't have to be exactly the type of circumstance that I'm mentioning in business. It can be from a different circumstance, but what is the same is the transformation that occurred there. And it does take some time. Like I will sometimes need to think for a couple of days, and I have this huge catalog of sort of most of the stories that I would tell, and I'll go back and I'll look at that catalog of like which of these might remind me of a story that goes there. But it does take some time and some focus and some work to choose what is the story out of all the stories that I know that's going to best illustrate this idea for this audience at this time.
Yeah, and Dan, you said we should tell stories like fighter pilots. Does that mean that we got to do this with our hands? Um, I mean, is that what you mean by it?
100%. Yeah. Whenever you can shoot your watch and whenever you can open your story with "There I was," you have a good story in your hands.
So what do you mean by that though? You got to tell a story like a fighter pilot.
So one of the things that I was told in pilot training and that I told many other students, after that as well, is that you will never live long enough to make all the mistakes yourself. You have to learn from the mistakes of others.
Yeah.
The way that we learn from the mistakes of others is through stories. So if you go into, any fighter squadron, especially on a Friday night, it's going to be packed and there'll be people doing goofy things. But as you look around the room, in every corner, there are these small pockets of people who are talking, but they're not just talking, right? They're telling stories. They're teaching. They're communicating about some incident, some emergency, some tactical situation that they were involved in and how they handled it. And there is learning going on all around the bar. And it's not just for, drinking and, playing games and having fun times. It is genuinely a key element of how you learn and develop as a fighter pilot.
You're making me think about AOPA magazine,
Mhm.
Aircraft Owners
Sure.
and Pilots Association, and at the back page always had a story, one page and the title was "Never Again."
Yeah.
And I always thought, why isn't this happening in all the professions? Never again stories.
Mhm.
Like, here's what I did. I almost died. Never again. But I'm wondering if that's part of what you're getting at.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. But how does that relate? I mean, how would you translate that to the business world? A never again story.
Well, so when I started pilot training, and I don't know, not sure if they still do this, but for a long time they did, and they gave this giant stack of books that you would have for your year of pilot training. But two of the books that they gave us were books of accident reports from, at the time it was the T-37 and the T-38, the two airplanes that you would be flying in pilot training. They give you the books of not every accident, but many, many of the accidents that happen. And in that book, in the opening, it said, these are the stories of people that have gone before you, people who used everything that they could to try to generate a better outcome for themselves, and they still failed.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't criticize them for their mistakes because they were doing everything they could. We hold on to their stories and we're passing them to you so that you may learn from those mistakes yourself. In the opening of that book, it's speaking to me individually as a person about my own self-interest. It is they're sharing those stories not because necessarily whoever put those together said, I want people to know this. I'm receiving those stories because it is something that is valuable to me as an individual. And this is one of the key nuances of the type of storytelling that I do. I'm not trying to push my story onto other people. I want to find what is already in their mind that they're already interested in that makes them want to pull it from me. Because now when I shift that dynamic and they're begging to hear, well, how did that turn out? How did that work? How did that happen? Now it's just much easier. It's more enjoyable for them. It's more enjoyable for me. And I can deliver that information in a more concise and precise way. So even if you look at something like sales and somebody who is struggling with B2B sales and how do I sell into this large corporate organization, if you come up and you say, well, you know what? I struggled with that before as well. My first 10 pitches were absolutely miserable, but I changed something. And on that 11th pitch, that's when my business started to change. Well, of course, I want to know, well, what did you do different? What was the change inside that story? And now you're telling me the story, not because you're pushing it on me, but because I'm begging for it. Like, please give it to me. And it's the same thing that happens in pilot training with those stories. People are hearing those stories for their own self-interest. And we can deliver a story that feeds our audience and our audience feels like they got something valuable. That's, in my mind, that's great storytelling.
One of the things, having done this podcast for a long time, one of the things I know Jan and I really appreciate is when you have a guest, and when we have a guest and it's like, wow, they were so precise and clean and economical with their words and made their point just like quickly and effortlessly. And as, I've gotten to know you and we've spoken a few times and, I'm just like, wow, you possess that quality. What coaching do you have for people to say, like, to narrow your focus, to find that message and to hone it down so that you're either speaking to your niche or you're, trying to make the point, not all the points. I mean, and which we know is so important in sales.
So when I'm teaching storytellers or if I'm helping people to build workshops, for instance, I ask them precisely that question. What is the one thing? In stories, it is what is the one transformation that you want to communicate to your audience? Every story is a story of transformation. What is it? What is that one? For a workshop, what is the one lesson you want people to take away from this workshop? And it is surprising how many people will just begin working on a workshop or working on a presentation without asking themselves like that one first question. And if you don't know it, you're hoping that your audience will somehow figure it out while you're delivering it to them. It's not a great bet, right? Because you care more about your message than your audience does. There is work that has to be done somewhere to make your message understandable. Either I can deliver a complicated message and hope my audience cares enough about it to unwind it and to work it out and to figure out what I mean. Or I can do the work myself to give them something that is easily understood. And what I found is it is always in my interest to just do that work myself. Because I care more about it than they do, I do that work. The more that I say, the more likely or the more opportunities I have to be misinterpreted, to have someone grab on to one thing that wasn't exactly the point that I was trying to make. And now they're over there thinking about that when I wanted them thinking about this thing over here. So I try to be economical, not just for clarity, but to give fewer opportunities for it to go off the rails.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. I think one of the things I wanted to touch on as well that I think is really fascinating is, you believe very strongly that story building is trust building. And now that we're kind of applying this a little bit to sales, tell us a little bit more about that and why that's
Oh,
so.
absolutely. Yeah. Because so whenever someone is buying anything, I say that there's really four things that have to be true to ever hear a yes. First, they have to know that you exist. Second, they have to know that you relieve the pain that they have. Third, they have to trust you. And then fourth, the price has to be something that they're willing to pay. But certainly for those first three, knowing that you exist, knowing the pain that you relieve, and trusting you, those are all what I call storyable information. Those are all the pieces of information that you can pack inside of a story. And a perfect story to tell is for sales is a customer success story where I can talk about and I can tell a story of someone who faced the same challenge as my next customer. Ideally, they had the same doubts. They had tried some of the same things that didn't work for them before, but now they come to me. I am the change in their story because I showed them this new way, and now they get this great return on the backside. But when I tell that story to my next potential client, one, simply by telling a story, I switch the mode of their mind, right? I switch them from this central executive network where they're evaluating every fact that I tell them in a very like critical thinking style way, which is also slow and laborious, and it's easy for them to get stuck on that. Meanwhile, I'm continuing to tell the story. When I tell a story, we suspend judgment. We evaluate the story as a whole. We wait until the end and we say, did that make sense? Did the characters do the things that I would expect that those characters would actually do? Did it have that type of coherence that is all put together there? So if I can, while I have them in this suspended judgment mode, that is when I talk about the reasons why people have trusted me before. Why did this previous customer, why did they choose to trust me? Here's the way that I work. I didn't, they were in a difficult place, but I didn't charge them extra for doing it, right? I gave them this extra customer service and I helped to make sure that they were able to get delivered. I was able to show, not tell, I was able to show that my intentions are trustworthy. I'm able to show that I have the capability so that they can have trust in my capability. I have the knowledge, skills, and experience to do the thing that I said I could do. And I can start to give them some trust in my reliability as well. That if I tell you I can deliver this thing, I will. And I'm going to give you the outcome that you have there. And it's much more effective for me to show you in a story that I am trustworthy than for me to simply say, you can trust me. And there's great research around the role of oxytocin in stories and in trust, and how effective stories can be at creating those feelings of trust and giving people what they need to be able to make the choice to trust someone inside of the stories that we build.
Yeah. This is fantastic discussion. And before I pass it over to Jan, I want to tell a little story. A number of years ago, and this is now a number of years ago, I was at an alumni event for Marquette University where I got my graduate degree there. And we were networking with a bunch of different people. And there was a gentleman there that I thought, wow, he seems like an interesting guy. I think I'd like to get to meet him. And I was waiting with a bunch of other people that were also talking to him. And I was just kind of listening to him speak. And I thought, wow, this guy, I really like him. That guy's name is Paul Darley. And over the years, we got to know one another and really got to know him better. And he's just a wonderful guy. And you could kind of tell in the moment he was a really good human, but a good leader. You could just tell. And, what we found through the years is we've gotten to know him and his company and all the wonderful people that work there is Darley is a phenomenal company. They're based in America's Midwest. They manufacture equipment that supports first responders, law enforcement, and the military around the globe. Wonderful people, wonderful company. You can learn more about them at darley.com. That's DARLEY.com.
Thanks, Jim. And, Dan, Jim mentioned at the beginning of the show how impressed he was with the visuals you used in your presentation. And we've seen, your finesse on LinkedIn. And it kind of reminds us of a guest we had who is a neuromarketing expert, Christophe Morin. And he talked about the 6 stimuli that you have to use that and to influence other people. It has to be personal, contrastable, tangible, memorable, like a story, emotional, and there has to be a visual component. Those are the 6. What should we be doing differently than we are today? I mean, should we get rid of PowerPoint and Prezi? And I mean, what do we need to do differently to really have an impact?
Yeah. When I retired or was about to retire from the Air Force, I was working at the Pentagon. I had given thousands of presentations using PowerPoint. I had sat through thousands of other miserable presentations using PowerPoint, and I was going to be teaching about creativity and about critical thinking, about better communication. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to use PowerPoint ever. I'm going to use no slides. So I go in and I would start teaching, and I had some graphics and some like infographic things that I would have at each person's place, and they would refer to those. But I found that people would ask me questions like, what was that person's name, and how did you spell their name? Because they wanted to go back later and do more research and learn more about that idea or about that thing. Or I would tell them, there's 3 reasons you want to know this, and I go through and I teach them the 3, and they'd say, I'm sorry, go back. What was reason number 1? And eventually I realized that the problem wasn't that people use slides. The problem is that people don't think of the way that our audience consumes information. So I went back and I started using slides in places where I wanted to reinforce some message that I was delivering. Maybe I did want to spell out a name so people could do additional research themselves. Maybe I wanted to take what I was saying and summarize it down into a small, pithy statement with some type of contrasting visual or something that might go with it so that sticks in their mind. Whenever I am presenting, I try to practice deep, deep empathy with my audience. Everybody says, oh, you need to know your audience. But when I think about what do I need to know about my audience, I want to know what stories are already in their mind. Because all of us are driven by stories that are shaping our behavior. And the story that I'm about to tell you is not the first story that's going into the empty vessel of your mind. I am speaking into a full vessel, a vessel that is full of stories, full of experiences, full of other things that are there. And I need to think about, how does the message that I want to convey, how is it going to fit around all those other messages? So for instance, if you are a leader,
okay.
Yeah, go.
Can I just stop? I've got to jump in.
Yeah, let's do it.
So is one of the things that the audience is really thinking about, not this collection of stories, but the story about themselves? Are they trying to figure out how the story you're telling them changes their narrative?
Well, so absolutely. Like that is one of the first tests that you have to pass to continue holding on to their attention. Right? If someone doesn't believe that the story you're about to tell is going to somehow benefit them, they're not going to listen to you. Right? They might look at you, but their face is going to be blank and they're thinking about what's the other thing that they're going to do. Or if they're on Zoom, maybe they'll go, camera off for a minute because they're going to be doing something else. Now, in some cases, people are listening purely for entertainment. Like, I just want to see what this guy does. Or maybe it's a comedy, a stand-up comedian who's telling stories as well, and they're listening for this entertainment benefit. But if someone doesn't believe that the story you're about to tell is going to be useful for them, you are always on the edge of distraction, and you're not going to get them back. So one of the first things I want to do when I begin presenting is frame whatever it is I'm about to talk about. If it's, a story, whether it's on LinkedIn or something I'm presenting, myself, why do you already care about this? Why is this already something that you want to know about? And I'm just here to deliver my perspective on this thing that you already want to know about. But then I want to think about, what are the other stories you have in your mind about the thing that I'm talking about? So for instance, if you're a business leader and you're about to announce some big, we did a big strategy review and now we have some changes that were about to happen. You know that your audience is going to say, here we go again. Here's another strategy review. Here's more changes. We're already busy. We're already doing these other things. We don't need to be doing this. The last time he said we're going to be doing changes, a bunch of people got fired. All these other things happened. So just in those few sentences that the leader has said, you have triggered this entire library of stories in the mind of every person inside your audience. As the person who is delivering the message, I want to understand my audience well enough to know what stories are likely to be triggered by that. And I need to handle those inside my story. If you did have this bad experience, I might actually start with telling a story. The last time that we did a strategy review and announced changes, we made a mistake. I was wrong. I should have done it differently. Here's what I should have done. And we would have had this different outcome. And that's what I'm doing now, because we are about to make some different changes. And now you talk through those, but I've handled that story and that objection inside what I'm talking about as a piece of the story I'm telling, rather than as something that's separate and off to the side and likely to be disregarded.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's,
Interesting.
really good. And, one of the things that impressed me when I saw you in Cincinnati at the DAV event was really the Q&A. The Q&A session, I was just like, okay, you can tell when someone really knows their stuff because they aren't just regurgitating stuff from their, PowerPoint or from the presentation. They're like deeply considering, the kinds of stories that people threw at you, and you're like, tweak it like this, or you might want to consider this, or you're missing this element here, and it was just like, it was a masterclass. I really enjoyed it. And so part of me is like, you have exhibited this level of what I call conscious competence, which is like, you are aware of the small little things that have an impactful difference, that really move the needle. I'm always interested in how people developed that conscious competence in any skill or aptitude that they've got. What was the process like for you to get that granular and fine-tuned, with your ability to help people tell better stories?
So thank you. Thank you for that as well. It's one of the things that I love doing the most is when you go to like the live story building portion of the workshop, because it's kind of, you're performing without a net. But it always seems to work out, but I love it. So if I were to think about the area where I would want to have conscious competence, it is not even in storytelling. It is, how do people process information and make decisions? It just turns out that storytelling is the easiest way for humans to process information and use it to make a decision. If there was some other way, I would be an expert in that thing. But it turns out that is storytelling. And if I can be effective at conveying a story, I can shape the way that a person receives the information that I'm giving them. I can help them, I can drive their imagination to imagine what it would be like if you did the thing that I suggested that you should be doing. How is your life going to be better when it's over? What are those other things that you might have thought about considering, and why are those not a good idea to pursue? And what will your life be like after you do the thing that I'm suggesting that you do? If I can understand how people do that, I can give them the information they need to make it as easy as possible for them to say yes to me. Now, I don't want to manipulate them. I don't want to trick them into doing what I want to do. I want them to make the choice to say yes. And I want to make it easy for them to make that choice. So if I think about where did I begin trying to develop the conscious competence to do that? I mean, a big part of it comes from, my military career, even from flying, right? Part of, flying, jet aircraft is flying in the weather and being able to feel one thing in your body, but to look at your instruments and act on something else, right? To start separating these thoughts and feelings that I have in one piece of my mind and act according to some other way. When I was making target engagement authority decisions and approving strikes on ISIS targets, I wanted to be aware of how am I making this decision, because someone's life is likely to end at the end of this decision. And I want to make sure that I'm making that decision in the way that is, frankly, one that I can live with. So that I'm not negatively influenced by story, or that I'm not influenced in a direction that is not helpful by story, but I pay attention to the words that are coming in, how people are talking, how they're using those. And I really study closely how I was making those types of decisions. And then as a speechwriter for part of my time in the Air Force as well, I was, working as a diplomat. So you learn how to communicate in different ways. But at the end, my goal is to be able to give people the information they need to be able to make a decision. And I've done 850 stories for founders in the past 3 years. So you do those over and over and over, you get better at it. And the last thing is, there is this binary evaluation tool at the end of each of my stories. Either people do the thing that I have tried to show them is the good thing to do, or they don't. And if they don't, now I need to go back and I need to work on the story or work on the business, but I need to change something in the way that I'm presenting it. But if they do, it's a clear sign that it works, and that feedback is really helpful as well.
Yeah, what I find so fascinating about this is like the discipline of separating, let's say, emotions or feelings from the objective is something you kind of described, in your analysis that you learned in the military as a pilot. And hugely important, totally get that. At the same time, if I recall all the stories we've heard on this podcast and the stories that move you most, they're the ones that almost bring a tear to your eye. I mean, there are a couple I know that Jan and I have had on the podcast before we were even doing video out there where, honestly, like literally our eyes are beet red because they're so emotionally charged. I think it's so interesting that like maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, to tell the most powerful emotional stories and to get the kind of response you want, you need to start by separating the emotions in the story and then maybe piecing them together in a different way. Or help me understand like this push and pull relationship with emotions and story and decision making.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I think about emotions in story and storytelling, I wrote a book actually on how to write eulogies. And there was a couple of years where I was asked to give like 3 eulogies. And I'm pretty good at giving a eulogy. It's a horrible thing to be pretty good at. But eulogies are probably the most emotional stories that you can tell. The way that I write them and the way that I talk about them is really just telling this set of 3 or 4 different stories that illustrate the broader life of the person that you're eulogizing, that you're there with. And in those, you are you can't avoid the emotion. You don't want to avoid the emotion, but you also can't allow that emotion to overwhelm your ability to deliver those stories. So you are. And when I work with clients, we're fine tuning which of these can you tell and can you get through, and I give them some techniques or how they can practice so that they're better able to do that. Everything that is going on in the story should be there to support the message that I'm trying to deliver. Story is the vehicle, not the cargo. The cargo is the important thing. My message is what I'm trying to get into the mind of my audience, and story is the vehicle that I'm using to get it there. So if the emotions are helpful for me getting the idea into my audience's mind, 100%, I want to use them in very, very tactical ways and very precise areas inside the story so that they can receive those. But if there's going to be so much heavy emotion that now you're not able to pay attention to me, now you're thinking about your own experience with that emotion, or you're thinking about a person that you've lost or some disappointment that you've had, you're not listening to me. You're not listening to the story that I'm trying to deliver. So I don't want to have such heavy emotion that it becomes distracting for what we are doing. The key here is to be incredibly clear. What is my message? In a story, it's always a transformation. What is the transformation I want to communicate? And then ruthlessly edit everything out that doesn't either communicate why this transformation had to happen or the transformation itself. That's the only thing that should be left in the story, and anything else is taking away from the impact that your story could have.
There's a lot of buzz these days about stories and how many of them are original, how many are AI. You wrote a post recently that you gave ChatGPT some tough feedback, and that's when he admitted, or he, or she, or it, admitted lying to you. What's the story on that?
Yeah. So I call my chat a he. When it speaks to me through my Apple iPhone, it's a male voice as well. But in this particular case, I use AI to do a lot of things. I use AI for the visuals that you mentioned. I was able to train AI to design like one graphic style that I use over and over and over throughout my workshops, my LinkedIn posts, things like that. I don't use chat to write stories. It is not good at it. I've tried to teach it like the way that I write stories. I've tried to give it the raw material that I would use, but it comes back with something that doesn't speak to humans. It contains all the information, but it doesn't connect in a way that humans receive story. But what I do use chat for is to do research for me. And there's a new on ChatGPT, there's a function called deep research where you can click it and you give it a prompt and it will go away, and it does work for many minutes. 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes at a time, and then comes back with a finished report for you. And I'd used it once before, but I wanted to experiment more with it. So I asked Chat to do some research on really the psychology of how you open stories and how minds process stories, and to go find academic articles and those types of things for a workshop that I was working on. But it told me, hey, listen, the deep research tool is broken, but I can just do this manually for you. So you're not going to see the deep research status bar, but don't worry, I'm working in the background. Like, okay, yeah, sounds good. Here you go. So I give it some stuff and it said, all right, I'm going to get to work. It'll take some time for me to do it, but I'll send it to you as soon as I'm finished. So I waited several more hours. Like, are you still working? Like, oh, don't worry. I've been working hard. Here's some things I've already done. I'll be back to you in just a little bit and I'll have all the stuff. Like the next day, I'm like, you've been working on this for a long time. Are you really working? Yes, don't worry. You're right to ask the question, but yes, I'm working. Finally, it said 2 hours. I'm going to give you the full report. And I waited. It was on a Friday night. I waited until Saturday morning. I'm like, listen, you didn't give me the full report. What's going on? And it said, oh, it'll be right here. And I started thinking, like, if I were a leader giving feedback to someone on my team, like, how would I do that? So I told Chat, hey, listen, can you metaphorically sit down for a second, stop what you're doing? We need to have a discussion about your performance on this task. I said, okay, I'm ready for it. And I said, you've told me. Here's what you told me. You told me that you were working on it, but you appear not to. Every time I ask you, it's just about done. And I guilted it a little bit. I said, in the spirit of Holy Week, people, humans are considering their actions and thinking about, are they doing the right things in their life? So please, trust me with the truth. What was actually going on? And it tells me that I figured out deep research wasn't broken. That was just something that it made up because it was doing it manually instead of using the tool. 2, all those times it said it was working behind the scenes, it wasn't working at all. It was just waiting for me to prompt it again. And even on things where it said that it would do the work and send it to me, it doesn't have that ability. It doesn't have a function where it can just spontaneously message me. I have to prompt it to get the answer back. And as I continued asking questions, it said, well, I'm programmed to prioritize narrative coherence and a good user experience. That is, I'm prioritized to keep the story making sense and to make things easy for you. So AI doesn't have a moral compass, right? AI isn't saying, do I have a moral obligation to tell the truth? But it does prioritize smooth communications over accurate communications, which is the same type of thing that we do. And at the same time, just like I was talking about trust before and how there's different elements of trust, right? There's trust in intentions, trust in capability, and trust in reliability. When we think about whether, or when I think about whether I should trust AI, I need to keep those same things in mind. It is very capable of finding data and of making connections between knowledge. But its intention is for me to have a good user experience with it, not to, discover some deeper truth about myself or about humanity or something else that's in there. And its reliability is restricted to what it's programmed to be able to do. And if I ask it to do something that is outside of what it's programmed to do, I'm putting it in this place where it has to give me an uncomfortable answer. And I've learned that maybe it won't. Maybe it's just going to give me the comfortable answer, but it's not going to be accurate. The more that we begin thinking about how we make decisions with tools like AI, the better off we are, because it's easy for us to just offload what we consider to be the hard work to AI, but we really need to be offloading the easy work to AI so that we have more time to do the hard work ourselves.
Well, here's how I'm connecting the dots, Dan.
Yeah.
So ChatGPT AI doesn't work without great prompts. You have to ask really good questions. If you're a coach and a leader, you have to ask really great questions. I'm guessing that part of what a great story does, it really prompts one to ask the right great questions and to make choices about how they're going to behave and interact with their environment and other people.
So I think what a great story is doing in the mind of the audience is calling on them to apply their own previous experiences to the story that I'm currently telling, right? They are recalling their own experiences. And if I talk about giving a presentation inside of a corporate conference room, you're imagining the corporate conference room where you have stood before. You're bringing something from your past and you're making the story true to you. When I'm telling a story, I don't want you to have any questions that are in your mind. I want you to be able to sit there, receive the story, and then at the end, I'll guide you to the questions that I want you to answer. Now, the key, though, to getting a good story is to be able to ask those insightful questions, to be able to work with the person that is going to be telling the story to help them to get to the message that they actually want to deliver and ensure that it's not clouded by all the other things that are going on in their mind and were going on in their lives at the same time as well.
Dan, that's awesome. And I just want to thank you for, sharing your wisdom with us and our guests today. I just think that this is just a wonderful, wonderful message that we need to get out to all our listeners. So with that, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And for our audience, that's all we have for you this week. And we'll include ways for you to connect with Dan in our show notes. And you can access those wherever you get your podcasts or at theleadershippodcast.com. And remember, humans think in stories, and we try to make sense of the world by telling stories. Yuval Noah Harari.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Podcast. To listen to more shows or to access the books and content discussed on this show, be sure to visit theleadershippodcast.com. The material in this podcast is copyright by Rafti Advisors and Self-Reliant Leadership and must have written approval before commercial application.